Today on Inside Utah Politics, Senator Mitt Romney. He's here to discuss some of the bills he's working on and to weigh in on some of the big issues on the table in the nation's capital. Plus, COVID guidelines scaled back significantly as students across the country head back to class. What the Biden administration is saying about the situation in our schools.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Utah Senator Mitt Romney. Senator, great to have you back on the show. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Glenn. Good to be with you.
You've been traveling throughout the state of Utah quite a bit over the past week. Talk to us about what you've been seeing and doing here in Utah.
Well, what I'm hearing from people is they're concerned about inflation.
I would think so.
Yeah, the high cost of gasoline, the high cost of food. They don't see it going away anytime soon. And they wonder why Washington isn't doing much to help out. The president just signed a new bill called the Inflation Reduction Act. It doesn't do anything like that at all. Actually, it probably modestly increases inflation. So they want some help, and they're looking for us to do that. We also spent time in southern part of our state where people are concerned about water and how we make sure that we can continue to grow and live our lives as we'd like to and have the water that we need to have an abundant lifestyle.
Let's dig into the Inflation Reduction Act since you brought it up. You hear from you and your Republican colleagues, then you hear from Senates on the issue, and it's almost like we're living in two different worlds. Majority Leader Schumer, I hear him saying this is the most significant legislation passed in decades. He says, as clear as the nose on his face, it will reduce inflation. How do we get to this point where it's viewed so differently between the two parties?
Well, truth in advertising has never had a big role in politics, and so they named something which had nothing to do with stopping inflation. This, by the way, when the president came into office 2 years ago, he didn't think about inflation, said inflation would be very temporary, and they put this bill together back then. So now it comes forward a little smaller than it was before. Now it comes forward. They're going to change the name. Before it was Build Back Better. Now it's the Inflation Reduction Act. It's the same thing. And it basically has the government spending more money. And when the government spends more money, it's inflationary. When the government cuts back, it puts the brakes on the economy. They're doing the opposite.
There was one part of that bill that's getting a lot of attention. It was the amendment on the insulin cap, $35 cap for private insurance. If that's not the answer forward, what is? I know you've met with constituents here in the state of Utah who are really struggling with this issue.
Yeah, there's no question, but we have to find a way to limit the price on insulin. There are a number of reasons why insulin has been treated differently than other pharmaceuticals, and the generics have not been able to make the kind of headway in insulin that they have in the other things that we buy. And Senator Susan Collins of Maine has a bill which I'm looking at that may well be able to pass. But the approach the Democrats have taken I don't think was the most effective approach. But look, we clearly need to reduce the price of insulin. Intermountain Healthcare is building a facility that is going to manufacture insulin on a generic basis. Their price per vial is $30. So it's happening on a free market basis, and the legislation is not ideally suited in my view.
You mentioned water worries down in southern Utah. Not far from here, our studio sits the Great Salt Lake. We are literally watching it disappear. Yeah. You ran a bill that will provide money for studies, but do we need to do more in the meantime?
Yeah, number one, we need a study to find out what actions can we take that would actually solve the problem of the shrinking of the Great Salt Lake. And then at the same time, we have to have water funding for the kinds of projects that will help us do that, whether it's buying water rights or preserving water through reusing our secondary water. There are a number of things, and we needed funding for that. That we got in the infrastructure bill, which I was able to help negotiate. So we put aside many billions of dollars, not just for Utah, but for the entire country to deal with these water issues. So it's a two-part process. One, study it. We got the Army Corps of Engineers that will study along with, by the way, the legislature in Utah. Brad Wilson has done a great job shepherding legislation through with the same intent. Let's figure out what the answers are, and then we have the funding necessary to build the projects that will help us preserve the lake.
How crucial do you see it as preserving the lake, and are you confident it can be done?
I'm confident it can be done. I'm not confident it can be done cheaply. We spend a lot of money getting oil here from Alaska or down to the pipe, the refineries and get it back to us. But when people think about water, they don't want to spend that money. Well, water is more precious than oil. And we're going to have to spend whatever it takes to make sure that we do not have the Great Salt Lake dry up on us, because the Great Salt Lake, with a dry lake bed, as you know, would send plumes of dust that would be hazardous to our health. It also would mean less lake effect snow into our mountains, which means less free or clear and pure water going into the Colorado and into the Lake Powell. There are a lot of reasons why we have to take some action, and it may be expensive.
Where do you see your bill going as far as the study aspect of it?
Well, the Army Corps of Engineers is now tasked with evaluating what kinds of steps can be taken to actually maintain the lake and bring it back. Now, hopefully, Mother Nature will give us a lot of water, but if it doesn't, we got a plan for what else we can do. And so we're going to make that assessment and look at the projects that would be necessary to get the water that we need to be in our communities and keep our businesses going and our homes enjoying the life that they enjoy. But we need to know the particulars and the specifics, get the science, and then at that stage make the investments. And I mean, the ideas as wild as pipelines to buying water rights to conserving. Clearly, we don't need to have grass median strips. We don't need to be watering our lawns as much as we do. These are the kinds of things we'll have to evaluate.
Yeah, and these are things we're now thinking about as we see the consequences of the lake drying up. You've been going around talking a lot about families and the need for policies to be family friendly. The Family Security Act is something you've been working on. Give us an update on where that stands right now.
Well, the Democrats have their own plan, and it was part of the Biden original plan. It got stripped out, so their plan didn't pass. So now the Democrats are willing to work on a bipartisan basis, and that's the way most things get done properly in Washington, is bipartisan. So they're willing to work on a bipartisan basis to see if we got a good program, and I think they're going to like mine or something like it. It's pretty simple. We take the child tax credit, which is complicated. People have to hire folks to do their taxes for them to figure out how they get the credit, and then they get it at the end of the year. We take that money, which is being improperly used, in my opinion, with too much administration, too much cost of tax preparation, and we use that money to instead give people a check on a monthly basis for each child that's under 18 years of age. And that gets money to people when they need it. Doesn't cost more money to the federal government, but it helps people recognize that they have the resources to have a child if they want a child.
And why do you think that's so important in this day and age to have policies like that in place?
Well, you know, we talk to people who have decided not to have a child, in some cases to have an abortion or just not to have kids or not to have another kid. And the number one reason they decide to have a child limiting decision is because they don't think they can afford having a kid. So saying to them, hey, guess what? If you do get pregnant, you're going to get $700 a month while you're pregnant. Number two, your child is going to get $350 a month until they're 6 years of age, and they get $250 a month. And if you have 2 or 3 kids, you're going to get these checks. And by the way, it doesn't cost the government any more money because we're already spending it in a tax credit now that's not effective. So it helps people. If they want to have a child, they're able to know that they will have the resources to be able to do so.
The PACT Act recently went through Congress. You were one of the senators who voted against that. I've personally heard from veterans who were disappointed by that vote. What is your message to them? Yeah,
there's a better approach, and Republicans had a bill that was a better bill. I would have preferred the bill that we put forward. The bill that the Democrats put forward is almost $700 billion in spending over the next 10 years. It's a lot of money. So they say, well, gosh, is this absolutely needed? Well, it turns out that the people who drafted the bill said, look, if you've been in Afghanistan or in Iraq for one day and you were near a burn pit and you get any health condition at all, the federal government is going to pay for that condition for the rest of your life. So we said, wait. It ought to be someone who's there for longer than one day. It ought to be a health condition that's actually related to the emissions from this burn pit. And those things were eliminated from the bill. It didn't make sense, so a better bill is one that we're promoting.
Okay, and now that this has passed, do you see that what you call a better bill still potentially on the table or not?
You know, I think if Republicans are able to get the House, the Senate, and the White House at some point, we'll improve the legislation that was passed by the Democrats. What this means, by the way, what they've done is going to result in a huge backlog at our VA system, in our VA hospital here in Salt Lake, because all sorts of people with any medical condition who've been to Iraq and Afghanistan are going to be able to get entirely free coverage for all their health care needs, whether it's related to that burn pit or not. So we're going to overwhelm the system. It really hasn't been properly thought through, and I think it's unfortunate the way the Democrats pulled it off.
All right, you talk about Republicans potentially taking back both chambers of Congress. We will see if that happens in the coming months. Senator, really glad to have you with us. Thanks for sharing your perspective with us.
Thanks, Glenn. Good to be with you.
Still to come, 2 Republican lawmakers who were vocal critics of former President Donald Trump faced primary challenges during the week. Our panel weighs in on how that all played out a little bit later. But first, a major change will make it a lot easier to access hearing aids when you will be able to skip the prescription after the break. It's back to school time, and the Biden administration is promising to make this school year as close to normal as possible for students who have spent the last 2 years dodging COVID-19. Washington correspondent Raquel Martin has that story.
After 2 challenging years for teachers and students, U.S. Education Secretary Miguel Cardona says things are looking up.
Such promise, such opportunity this year. We're in a much better spot this year than we were last year.
Cardona says schools across the nation now have the resources they need to address COVID-19 and help students.
They missed out on a lot the last couple of years. This year, they have to be given more.
He says thanks to the American Rescue Plan, school districts can ramp up mental health and tutoring services to help kids who may have fallen behind. The CDC also loosened its guidelines, allowing students without symptoms to stay in their classrooms even after a classmate tests positive.
We're all excited, and we're all feeling that we can control COVID-19 spread. We have better tools.
Education unions like the American Federation of Teachers are embracing the more hands-off approach.
The guidelines are smart. We really want to teach with us seeing each other's faces.
Union President Randy Weingarten says she's grateful the Biden administration is helping schools adapt to new challenges,
so that kids can get their mojo back and their confidence back.
But she says it's up to parents and local school districts to support teachers.
Teachers have to have the respect that they need to do their jobs, as opposed to the politics and the division and the polarization.
In Washington, Raquel Martin.
Millions of Americans can soon buy hearing aids online and in stores without a prescription. The FDA issuing a final rule during the week to make products widely available to those with mild to moderate hearing loss as early as mid-October. Washington correspondent Jesse Tenor reports.
Think of the FDA's new move to offer over-the-counter hearing aids to adults like readers, which are easily obtainable without a prescription.
It won't be the only solution or the best solution for everybody, just like is true for glasses. But I think that it's a way to get started, and that's a barrier that we really have to overcome.
The FDA found about 30 million Americans experience hearing loss, but because of expensive exams and devices, only about 1/5 of them get help. Dr. Sarah Sidlowski, the president of the American Academy of Audiology, hopes this new rule changes that.
It's not something to put off. It's not something to attribute to aging. It's something to take action about.
Starting in 60 days, adults with mild to moderate hearing loss can bypass a doctor for over-the-counter hearing aids. But those younger than 18 or with severe hearing loss still need a prescription for their devices.
My recommendation as an audiologist would still be that best practice is to get your hearing checked.
Current and former administrations, along with bipartisan groups in Congress, have been pushing for this change to allow patients to better shop around for the best deal.
Every American has a right to receive affordable health care.
Vice President Kamala Harris estimates consumers will save at least $2,800 per pair of hearing aids, as the new rule boosts competition and innovation. The FDA says device makers are largely ready to launch new products when the new rule takes effect in mid-October. And many advocates are still pushing for better insurance coverage of hearing health, similar to dental and vision.
Jesse Tenor reporting for us. Still to come, a lot of attention on 2 key primary races during the week. Our panel digs into the results after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to debate some of the big issues of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have former House Speaker Greg Hughes and former Salt Lake City Councilman Charlie Lute. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Glad to have you with us.
Great to be here. Good to be here.
Let's dig into the Republican primaries that we saw happen during the week, specifically Alaska and Wyoming. And let's start in Wyoming. Harriet Hageman defeating incumbent Liz Cheney. Greg, let's start with you. What do you make of this? Of course, a lot of the focus was on her opposition to former President Trump and his backing of the challenger.
Yeah, so that we saw this coming for a long time. The polls had never really looked good for Liz Cheney, which is shocking given the name and stature that the Cheney family, her father having been vice president and representing that state as a member of Congress a long time ago. You know, people might not know, but there's less people living in Wyoming than live in Utah County. So you've got about 500,000, a little more than 500,000 people living in that whole state. That's a size that you should be able to make your case on a very personal level. And for her to be beat by 35 percentage points, I think the message was absolutely clear. I don't think it was a misunderstanding. I don't think the people from Wyoming wanted Liz Cheney to represent them any longer.
But why? Talk about why.
I think that I think she's disconnected. I think that her participation on the January 6th commission, one that does not have any kind of semblance of fairness. There's not a fair number of Republicans. We wouldn't do that. You'd never see a commission like this in the state of Utah looking at issues of ethics. You would see a 50-50 Republican and Democrat makeup of a committee like that. There were no cross-examination or other sides of the stories that could even be explored. So I think people have lost faith in that. You see the numbers and the ratings for that. The commission has not been well. And I think that it looks like it's favoring. And look, when all the Democrats come, when Al Franken is supporting you and every Democrat wants you to win, I don't know that the people from Wyoming felt that was resonating with them.
All right, Charlie, a couple things to dig into, but first start off with your assessment of what you saw play out in Wyoming.
Yeah, I mean, it was a foregone conclusion. This race was about one thing, and that one thing is Donald Trump. And you know, and so Trump has had a very, very good primary season. He's been very successful at electing his candidates as Republican nominees. The real question is going to be what happens in November. This was really the Democrat or the Republican Party's chance to really make massive inroads in both the Senate and the House because of the off season. And this is all going to be turned on its head. You look at what's going on in Pennsylvania with Senator Crudite. You look at what's going on in Arizona. You look at what's going on with some of these more extreme candidates that are not playing well in the general field. So while Trump may have had a very good primary season, the question really is whether or not the Republicans, the general Republican Party, the traditional Republican Party, is going to stick with the sycophants, the Trump sycophants, who do anything to kowtow to Donald Trump. So we'll see what happens. But right now, you know, the strategy is working, but is it a general election strategy? Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. If the Republican Party had accepted that, they would be taking over the House and the Senate. And I just don't know what's going to happen. I mean, right now, I think they're still on track to do so, but it's not the foregone conclusion that it was a couple of months ago.
Okay, both of you have made clear you want to rebut what one of the other people said, but probably I'm going to give you the opportunity first, specifically on the January 6th.
Yeah. So Greg's just being silly at this point because, you know, it was saying that the Republicans have been forced out. The Republican Party chose not to participate. Remember that. You know, they put forward, they didn't want to participate. It is not going the way that they wanted.
Pelosi kicked off the members that McCarthy chose.
Because McCarthy chose people that didn't really want to get to the bottom of anything. They just wanted to obstruct, which is what we're seeing right now. So is the obstructionism going to play in November? I don't think it's going to. I may be wrong, but right now it's certainly not looking good for the long-term strategy in terms of the Republican Party staying. It's looking good for Donald Trump right now, but is it going to look good for Republicans long-term? Hard to say.
Okay, Greg, you wanted to jump in on what he was talking about with the Trump-backed candidates.
Yeah, well, we could keep saying Trump all day, and former President Trump has endorsed a lot of candidates, and his record is phenomenal. But if the talking points from the Democrats can only talk about Trump, and it's only about Trump, and it cannot be about anything else, they're going to have a very difficult midterm. I think even if they keep talking about Trump, they're going to have a difficult midterm because you've got inflation where it is, you've got harming families, you've got a border that doesn't exist that's bringing fentanyl and crime and chaos into this country. You've got a military that's suffering to the degree where you see Russia and China showing aggression that we've not seen in the past.
This is insane.
These are issues. Even the Inflation Reduction Act.
This is crazy at this point.
Even the Washington Post will tell you the Inflation Reduction Act will not touch or reduce inflation at all. So keep it about
Absolutely
Trump.
not. Absolutely not. Because here's the thing. Do you know what the Democrats have to talk about? Roe v. Wade. We have a chance to talk about the Supreme Court. There's a chance to talk about all of Biden's successes, which you may not like the Inflation Act, but it passed. And it's going to do with all Democrats, because Republicans have only chosen to obstruct everything unless.
Okay, let me ask you. Let me ask you this though on that one point. You do talk about the things that you're looking at with the Supreme Court and how that might energize Democratic voters. I'm very interested in seeing how that happens. But here's one thing we still have that polls are showing us, and that is the economy. We know that the economy usually is the top motivating factor for voters, and right now voters are still holding this administration accountable for that. So how is that going to balance out?
Too. That if you look at where the polls are going, the polls are moving up, because as gas prices lower, people's perception of the economy is going to go up. The president has very little control over gas prices, let's be honest.
But he has a lot of control when it goes down.
So when Joe Biden starts taking credit for lower gas prices, it's kind of silly. But it's just as silly as Greg saying that it's his fault for the prices going up. I mean, it's time that we really start talking about actual policies and real politics. And when you look at the Republican primaries, Greg can talk all he wants about how, the Republicans are only focusing, or, the Democrats are focusing on this and that. The Republican primaries have been solely about Donald Trump. Period. That is absolutely true.
American First.
Absolutely true. It is about Donald Trump.
They are kitchen table issues that the Democrats are failing on, that people are feeling in their family budgets. These are the areas that Democrats, they don't even understand the problem, let alone how to solve it. By a $700+ trillion you're going to spend and print more money, you think that's going to touch inflation?
It's going to print more money.
You think that's going
there's a way to pay for it.
The middle class or working people of this country? It's going to have its effect, just like it has up till now, increasing inflation. It's 87,000 more IRS agents.
Leveled.
Where the Congressional Budget Office has identified they're going to pull $20 billion out of the working class.
Your talking points are late. Your talking points are off.
No,
I'm sorry. Look, I don't like interrupting. The only reason I'm interrupting is because this is ridiculous.
Please, go ahead.
I'm absolutely tired of Republicans spouting off nonsensical talking points when you look at what actually is going on and it doesn't match up.
Okay, but Greg, I want to hear your thoughts.
Things are fine, then I guess
I'm not saying things are fine, but they ain't as bad as Greg is making them out.
Okay, Greg, I want to hear your thoughts on the point I brought up, though, as far as the economy being the top motivator for voters and how that'll impact the upcoming election.
Yes, I do think. I think when you talk about the economy, I would call those kitchen table issues that are affecting your groceries, your budget, how you get to work, and how you afford to feed a family, take care of your family. These are issues that Americans are struggling with, and it's recent. You've not seen this kind of. You have inflation we haven't seen in 40+ years. You can't say this is just magic and it just spontaneously arrived. It might have something to do with all the spending and the trillions of dollars, and now the $700 billion that they just passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. It is.
Wait, which one are we talking about? The Republican COVID bill or the Democrat COVID bill?
I'm talking about since Biden took office, on his watch, what he's done to print money and how we've seen inflation climb are impacting people's family household budgets, their lives. And I think that historically midterms go with the party that didn't win the presidency in the 2 years prior. So there's a historic pattern there. Mm-hmm. And then you add on top of it these kitchen table issues. And I don't think that the Democrats can just say Trump the entire time and see success.
We're not. But you also have to be realistic with what's going on.
All right, gentlemen. This segment went exactly the same way the pre-show text thread went,
and we're friends, by the way.
So I'm not
actually
surprised.
Friends. So you know, we are friends.
Yes,
yeah, I know. Okay. Thanks for being here. Appreciate the lively conversation. And stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now to look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. Congress now on summer recess. The Senate returns on Tuesday, September 6th. The House a week later on Tuesday, September 13th. The general election is coming up. It's set for Tuesday, November 8th. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on social media. Just log on and search Glenn Mills, ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your Sunday morning. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.